Hello, good evening. Donald Trump has tonight made the biggest foreign policy play of his presidency. He has pulled America out of the 2015 Iran deal signed by Barack Obama, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It was a campaign pledge, but in doing so, Trump has ignored Angela Merkel, Theresa May, and the man who was his best friend last week, Emmanuel Macron. Tonight, in a joint statement, the three European leaders expressed their regret and concern and agreed their continuing support of the deal. When Trump was a presidential candidate, his line was, "We have a horrible contract, but we do have a contract." Now he's announced he'll tear it up and reimpose the highest sanctions. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reacted immediately, calling it a bold decision against a terrorist regime. But will it increase or decrease the likelihood of further conflict in the Middle East? Here's our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban.
We cannot prevent an Iranian nuclear bomb under the decaying and rotten structure of the current agreement. The Iran deal is defective at its core. If we do nothing, we know exactly what will happen.
He then signed an executive order restoring sanctions. There was no plan B announced how else Iran's nuclear ambitions might be thwarted, rather ample evidence that the White House would rather return Iran to sanctions because of its role backing allies in the region.
There's no doubt that Iran has continued to cause a lot of problems across the Middle East, and it certainly doesn't appear that they feel like the deal binds them from continuing to fund terrorism across the Middle East.
The news didn't come as a surprise to the deal's European signatories, and they'd readied their response.
The nuclear deal with Iran is the culmination of 12 years of diplomacy. It belongs to the entire international community. It has been working, and it is delivering on its goal, which is guaranteeing that Iran doesn't develop nuclear weapons. The European Union is determined to preserve it.
But can European firms carry on trading with Iran if US sanctions are reimposed?
There's going to be a lot of heavy lifting that's going to have to take place in the weeks and months ahead in order to make that a realistic possibility and a reality. I think that the Europeans can take a variety of steps to insulate their firms from U.S. punitive measures, much like the Russians and the Chinese do. I think the Europeans have been hesitant to go down that route because they're worried about further damaging transatlantic ties beyond the damage that Trump has already caused.
America has proven an unreliable signatory to many international agreements. So the Kyoto Climate Change Protocol was never ratified. Similarly, Bill Clinton endorsed the International Criminal Court, but never sent it for ratification, and then President Bush revoked the decision anyway in 2002. There was the 2016 Trans-Pacific Partnership deal. President Trump withdrew from that one. So President Obama never framed the Iran deal as a treaty needing to be ratified, relying instead on a rolling suspension of US sanctions against Iran by the presidency.
This nuclear deal and sticking to it is not only a matter of nuclear global security, but also has very important repercussions for the credibility of the sitting US president and also future US presidents to dictate US foreign policy. Because obviously, if everyone is now under the impression that any future US president can undo what a former president has done in terms of international commitments and undertakings, it's going to be very hard to trust that as a counterpart that's reliable going forward.
And what about Iran itself? Polls suggest people there expect a response. But what will it be? Restarting enrichment or something less provocative? Tonight, Iranian President Rouhani pledged to carry on with the deal.
From this moment on, the nuclear agreement is between Iran and 5 other countries. From now on, 5 plus 1 has lost 1. And in these circumstances, we have to wait to see how the 5 other countries will react.
If Europe can come up with a package in which Iran can receive the benefits of the deal, Iran will consider remaining basically within the JCPOA and follow its commitments. But it's very hard to know whether or not that will hold up. And probably there will be some sort of retaliation around IAEA access and enrichment unless Europe does provide a strong signal to Iran that it's going to stand on their side.
Thank you very much, everyone.
So President Trump has fulfilled a campaign promise and junked President Obama's principal foreign policy achievement. The world now awaits the consequences.
Well, Mark is with me now. Mark, can we talk a little bit more about whether this deal can survive?
I think there are the near-term questions, some people suggesting this evening that some kind of re-entering of a discussion about how this could be saved for everyone. There is that kind of talk. I'm not sure I put...
For everyone?
But I'm not... That could America re-enter? I'm not sure I put much reliance on it. I don't think Iran would be up for that in those terms. And then there are the slightly longer-term questions. Now, critically, can European countries, China and Russia, carry on trading? I think they can make a good argument that it would be lawful for them to do so, both in terms of their own national laws and the UN Security Council resolution that buttresses this whole deal and which, of course, remains in place. Would America, though, move to take away some of that trade, either by doing secondary sanctions against firms doing it? We don't know.
But there's no sign that they want to do anything about that resolution.
No. And in fact, there was a briefing this evening by John Bolton, the National Security Advisor in the US, that suggested that the US, well, it can't do much about it because, of course, that would require a vote within the Security Council and the other countries wouldn't go along with that.
So what about Iran's position? We know what Rouhani said tonight.
Well, the foreign minister as well has tweeted tonight that Iran's view of it will be dependent on whether they can find a way through effectively. So if the Europeans, Russia and China can find a way to keep a productive trading and security arrangement in place, Iran seems ready to do that.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. Well, I'm joined now by Nazanin Ansari, an Iranian journalist for Kayhan in London, and from Washington by former Deputy Assistant to the President Trump, Sebastian Gorka, and also Jarrett Blanc. He worked in the US State Department while Barack Obama was president. His job was trying to ensure Iran fulfilled its nuclear commitments, and he now works at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Good evening to you all. I'm going to start with you, Nazanin Ansari. Like the Europeans, was Iran expecting this?
The Iranians were expecting it. I think they had been saying that they will ask the Europeans for support, and this is something that we have heard also from the think tanks here in London, that all their emphasis is now on Europe to be able to keep the bargain.
What Donald Trump paid a lot of attention to today was that what he's called the sort of spirit of the agreement had been broken, by the support for Assad, by the actions in Yemen, and by the support for Hezbollah, that actually what they were doing is being agents of terror in the Middle East. And he's sort of been saying that no matter what was actually happening with centrifuges, they weren't sticking to the spirit of the agreement.
Certainly, I think when you look at the amount of financial help that Iran is sending to Hezbollah, which, according to Mr. Nasrallah, is helping them logistically with weapons, training, it's estimated to be $1 billion a year. To Syria, it's between $6 to $15 billion a year, different estimates. So all this money that JCPOA was supposed to be able to generate for the betterment of the Iranian economy has been diverted internationally.
Now, interestingly, because that, all the millions of Iranians that Rouhani said would then get education and would get work, and there'd be all these foreign companies coming in, does this now put his position in jeopardy?
Well, his position has been in jeopardy because although the Iranian economy, the oil revenues went back to pre-sanctions level, the Iranian economy has suffered. I mean, since December 2017, we are seeing protests and strikes on a daily basis.
So do you think Rouhani will survive?
He has to survive, because if he doesn't survive, it is the system at stake.
Well, I'm going to come back to you in a moment. Thank you very much indeed. Sebastian Gorka, first of all, there was absolutely no evidence that Iran was breaking the deal.
Really? Did you listen to Prime Minister Netanyahu a week ago?
President Netanyahu was saying that what had been shown for these papers was that prior to 2003 they were working towards this, but there was nothing to say that since 2003 they were. So what I'm asking you is not so much that Iran is actually actively pursuing a nuclear bomb, it's because Donald Trump does not believe the deal is a good deal.
Not at all. If you go back, and I encourage your viewers to go back and watch the full 20-minute briefing from Prime Minister Netanyahu, it is clear from that massive data dump, the hundreds of thousands of documents, 500 ton worth of intelligence information, that the Ahmad project, the nuclear warhead project, is still going. Even if they hadn't been in technical breach, which they have been. Look up heavy water and JCPOA, and you will see that Iran is in technical breach as well as being in breach of the spirit of the agreement. The agreement itself is just bad. It doesn't talk about ballistic missiles, and it doesn't stop Iran's acquisition of nuclear weapons.
Well, let me put this to Jared Blanc.
Sunsets them.
Let me put this to Jared Blanc. And according to Sebastian Gorka, the Iranians had broken the deal and were in the process of moving forwards towards nuclear weapons.
No, that's flatly false. That has not been the conclusion of the International Atomic Energy Agency. It hasn't been the conclusion of the U.S. intelligence community. And it wasn't the conclusion of Secretary Mattis at his last testimony. By the way, it also wasn't what Prime Minister Netanyahu said. If I could also just respond to the last thing that Mr. Gorka was trying to say. The idea that the only deal that's a good deal is one that resolves every outstanding point of friction between two adversaries, that's just another way of saying, don't even try diplomacy, let's go straight to war. The JCPOA took the hardest and most important problem, Iran's nuclear program, and it took it off the table. Did it solve every other problem? No. But it did put us in a position to work on those problems. President Trump has now destroyed that position.
But Sebastian Gorka, he may have destroyed that position, you may say, up to a point, Jared Blanc, but it looks like the other signatories, the other people that signed up to that UN resolution can go on trading with Iran. Is that actually what President Trump is happy to see happen?
Not if you look at what our brand new ambassador to Berlin has tweeted out just a few minutes ago. He's given a very clear indication that German companies should desist trading with Iran as soon as possible and wind down their activities. This is the real nub of the issue. The European allies aren't protesting because of some altruistic love of multinational agreements. It's about money. The biggest trading partners to Iran after the JCPOA deal was signed are countries like Germany and France. So it's filthy lucre yet again.
Well, Jared Blanc,
that's categorically absurd.
Yeah. So can I just put that to Jared Blanc? Because the UN resolution still stands, and as Mark Urban said, this might end up in the law courts because despite what Grenell, the new ambassador to Germany, is saying, there is nothing here that says that Europeans can't trade with Iran.
So, first of all, it's categorically absurd that this is about economics for the Europeans. Iran is an insignificant market for Europe. This is about security for the Europeans. They are concerned about Iran's nuclear program. They've solved the problem, and they want to stick with the solution. As to whether or not international firms can continue trading with Iran, as a legal question, the answer is, of course, absolutely yes. The legality of secondary sanctions is very much in question. As a practical matter, the whole deal is really about secondary sanctions. It's about the threat that the U.S. had previously imposed on non-U.S. firms doing business with Iran. And the question really lies with the governments of Europe and the governments of Asia to decide, are they going to go along, even quietly, with the United States, or are they going to take active steps to allow their firms to do business with Iran and therefore protect the benefits Iran received from the deal? It's possible. It's difficult, but it's really a practical issue, not a legal one.
Sebastian Gorka, on the point that Donald Trump was making about, he seemed to be reaching out to the Iranian people and talking about the proud tradition, the proud history, the proud culture. Is Donald Trump seeking regime change in Iran, do you think?
I know he isn't.
This
is not what he believes in. No, he does not believe in regime change. He sees that as fundamentally antithetical to the American way, and he thinks that's not what we're here to do. And I just ask all your viewers, and your guest especially, if you have a problem with what President Trump today did, ask yourself why you are siding with a murderous regime, the largest state sponsor of terrorism, that puts homosexuals in prison and kills people who dissent, shoots women on the street who dissent with the mullahs. Those are the people you're defending, and you should be ashamed of yourselves.
Jared Blanc, are you ashamed of yourself?
No, I'm not siding with the government of Iran. I'm siding with U.S. national security interests. Iran is a regional power. We are a great power. We can deal with Iran so long as it does not have a nuclear weapons program or an ambiguous path to a nuclear weapon. We solved that problem with the JCPOA, and I believe in sticking with that solution.
Do you think...
How did the Sunset Clause solve that? I'm so curious. How does the Sunset Clause, which allows them to develop nuclear capacity after 7 years, take it off the table? You're living in a fantasy land, whoever you are.
Jared Blanc, answer that quickly, please.
So the JCPOA, like most arms control agreements, has terms. And like successful arms control agreements, it perceives its own follow-on. So if we had stuck with the JCPOA, had implemented it in good faith, then a few years from now we would go back to the table and figure out the next period with the strong support of our allies and partners. Now we're all alone.
Thank you very much. I just want to put this straight back to Nazanin. What chance do you think that Iran will seek a new deal?
Well, Iran has to be able to continue, the government and the system of Iran has to be able to continue operating financially. Right now it's bankrupt. And so it is in its best interest to seek a new deal. Certainly there have been voices already in the parliament asking, let's put everything on the table. Now, whether the Revolutionary Guards and the architects of Iranian strategy in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, would want to put all their cards on the table, that's another question. But at the end of the day, Iran has to decide whether it is a cause or whether it's a country. And if it's a country, it has to think of its people first.
Thank you all very much indeed.